going on, all you wild Twilight Zone enthusiasts out there? Your two favorite uncles back here for Cinephellas doing more 31 Days of Horror tonight. I am your hostess with the mostest. I'm Logan Myers. It's my good man over there.
And I'm Henry Hill. And tonight, you're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
John Landis, American Werewolf in London. Steven Spielberg, E.T. Joe Dante, The Howling. George Miller, Mad Max. These acclaimed directors take you to another dimension. A journey into a wondrous land whose only boundaries are your imagination. Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
That's right. These two wild rascals are back at it tonight. We're talking about one of my favorite flicks growing up as a kid, watching this over and over again, especially like during the Halloween season, and watched it during the summer quite a bit. Where, of course, we're talking about Twilight Zone. The movie came out in 1983, directed by John Landis, Joe Dante, of course, from Gremlins, Spielberg, and Miller, all directing different, basically, episodes or segments of the movie. There's 4 different stories. The first one probably being the most memorable due to what happened filming this. Of course, the first story has to do with a racist businessman that gets in trouble, and it kind of goes back in time to different eras.
Yeah, what an introduction to the Twilight Zone here. First, the movie kicks off, of course, with the car ride
Yes, of course.
with Dan Aykroyd and what's the other guy's name? Albert Brooks. And they're driving late at night, throughout I think it was like through the desert or something. Albert Brooks is turning out the lights. He's like, "Ooh, are you scared? Are you scared?" And then his friend, the passenger, played by Dan Aykroyd's like, "Oh, you want to see something really scary?" He turns around and then he just comes around and he's like this big monster and attacks Albert Brooks. Really cool introduction. And then he comes back at the end of the film too for the final story. But that was really cool. It gets you into the mode of the Twilight Zone. And, growing up, I had watched episodes of the old show too, the old series. And, there's several episodes that just blew my mind as a kid, like the Burgess Meredith one where he went back in time. He's this old guy. He's like the last person on Earth. He likes to read. So he reads a lot. And basically one day his glasses break. So he basically has nothing left to live for. And he's, what's he going to do? He's in the Twilight Zone. And yeah, this series always goes in interesting places, from the science fiction aspect all the way to the horror, to the mystery. It covers all those genres, which makes this a fantastic movie to visit for this, 31 Days of Horror. And it kicks off with Vic Morrow. Like you mentioned, he's this character. He's kind of down on his luck, working a 9 to 5, getting shit on at work. Everybody else is getting raises. He's not. And he's, talking with his friends and he's getting more agitated as the minutes go on. He's complaining about all the immigrants coming in. And that's when he starts, getting really racist. And eventually he's kicked out of the bar. And when he steps outside the doors, he goes back into Nazi controlled Germany. And it's wild. He starts getting shot at by them, and just goes on from there to different eras.
Yeah, and then he goes at a KKK rally in the 1950s down south somewhere, and then of course Vietnamese in 1960s Vietnam, which essentially was the death of the actor Vic Morrow, filming a scene with a helicopter killed him and 2 kids, and a bunch of other people were injured. This is the one that John Landis directed and is probably pretty messed up over that. And that's what most people remember from this movie is the first story. And of course, Vic Morrow behind me, his ultimate demise. But second one I really enjoyed too. I remember watching this as a kid, of course, the Scatman Crothers, being in this retirement home community, essentially older people, and turns them youthful, turns them into like kids again. It's a really cool story about life and growing old, reminiscent of your childhood and when you're young and free. And Yeah, really great story. This is the one I think it was done by Spielberg.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of like Cocoon.
Yeah.
You know, it had that Spielberg vibe to it for sure. The optimism and, older people wanting to be young again, and really captured that really cool. They all turned into kids throughout the movie. And there was the one guy there that was like the old guy, always angry and, quiet down. And, finally by the end of the skit, they got him to, join in on the fun and, try to remember back to when they were young and have some of that fun. And, that was a whole fun segment of the movie. I enjoyed that too. Very Spielberg like you mentioned. And that was probably my second favorite of the movie.
Yeah, the third one has to do with a woman finds a kid at like some diner, goes back to his house, and things aren't what they seem, essentially. His family's really off. They end up in this alternate reality created by this kid's imagination, having to do with cartoons and TV and stuff like that. Shows like a big rabbit, quirky kind of effects and things like that. Pretty interesting story.
Probably my least favorite out of them all, but it was still, within the Twilight Zone universe for sure. And a good story for, kids to watch. I remember liking it a lot more when I was a kid. Going back on it now, I was like, wasn't too impressed, but it was still good, but just not my favorite. And that leads into the last segment, which is, both of our favorites. Obviously, John Lithgow playing the, ultra anxious and, he hates flying. He's on the plane. It's during a storm and he's having a full on panic attack. When it starts getting bumpy, there's a lot of turbulence. And then he opens up his window and he looks out and he sees this creature on the wing and he just goes absolutely crazy.
I love the camera work in that particular, the last story with Lithgow, because he is so anxious, so sweaty, so over the top, and he really steals the show. And this is what a story that I'll always remember. I know they did it with the original with Shatner, recently with Adam Scott, with the new Twilight Zone, but Lithgow always comes to mind because he put 110% into this character
Yeah.
and portraying everything he's going through and trying to convince everybody on the plane that there's this creature sabotaging the plane, trying to kill him, but nobody believes him.
Man, yeah, he really goes off the rails. Like, the airplane side of the airplane blows off. Everybody's getting sucked out. Yeah, it gets crazy. But yeah, that one always stood out for me watching that as a kid and watching it now. Yeah, John Lithgow was great in that. And man, he really sold that part. He went through a full blown panic attack. And, if you've ever had a panic attack, you could just imagine how crazy it is. And yeah, and then nobody believes him. And then he gets on the ambulance at the end. And that's when it comes around back to the beginning again, because the ambulance driver is Dan Aykroyd again from the beginning. And he turns around and says, "Hi, how you doing back there? You want to see something really scary?" And then it cues
Full
the music.
circle.
Cool ending. Yeah, it comes full
Yeah.
circle.
I can't believe I forgot to talk about the very, beginning part of this movie, the intro, like with Aykroyd and Albert Brooks. That's the one that terrified me as a young kid, seeing that, the whole monster scene where he turns around. I love that.
Yeah.
Really sets up a really cool and awesome, like nostalgic tone to the movie, the 1980s. A lot of magic in movies, making movies, especially Spielberg and all these directors attached, Landis, Joe Dante, all of them put in this movie together. Forgot to talk about their narrator of the movie.
Burgess Meredith.
There you go.
Yeah.
From the original Twilight Zone. Right when I heard his voice in the movie, I'm like, that's definitely him. So that's cool how they kind of tied that in with him being in the original. He's still alive, obviously, back in the 80s. So that was really cool and a nice touch.
Yeah, it was cool. Cool hearing him. And there's a lot of Easter eggs throughout the film, too. If you're a big Twilight Zone fan, they sprinkled them throughout there. So keep your eyes peeled. But yeah, we got 4 great directors all working together for this movie. And, I had a blast with it. Only one segment that I didn't really enjoy too much. I thought it kind of brought the whole thing down a little bit, but by the end with the last one, that was great. The Nightmare at 20,000 Feet from Uncle George, really brings this movie home. We have Spielberg here, Landis, everybody gets to come in here and, direct these segments that, we're watching all these years later for the 31 Days of Horror. That's crazy. The story about Morrow, though, and his premonitions of dying in a helicopter crash, and then he's on set and that happens. Man, that's crazy. So maybe that's part of the reason they didn't end up making a part two. Maybe they thought, leave well enough alone, didn't want to have to worry about a curse or something like that. But yeah, he was also Jennifer Jason Leigh's dad, which is an interesting part of trivia there.
Yeah, she's still, one of my favorite actresses from back in the day in the 80s and still acting. So it's pretty interesting. Terrible way for her father to go, and he saw it coming, which is even more crazy. So I think most people remember that from this movie more than anything. But overall, this movie holds up for me. Loved it as a kid. Still, super nostalgic. A lot of great stories here, great directors, actors, practical effects. It's spooky at times. Lithgow's story being the best one, and one of his best performances, in my opinion. I love this movie from 1983, Twilight Zone, the movie. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 Dan Aykroyd hair pieces.
I too am going to give The Twilight Zone, the movie, a 4 out of 5 John Lithgow hair pieces.
We want to hear from all you wild horror enthusiasts. What did you like about Twilight Zone, the movie? What didn't you like about? What's your favorite Twilight Zone episode? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to stay subscribe. Also, check out these wild werewolves on Facebook, X, and Instagram, and our website, Cinephellas.com, for the latest, greatest TV, movie news, and horror reviews.
So stay scared out there, all you 31 Days of Horror fanatics out there. These two horror hounds will be back tomorrow with an all-new review for you wild ghouls. So until the next time, I'm Henry Lithgow.
And I'm Uncle Logan Romero, signing out until the next horror movie review, 31 Days of Horror.